Hi there and welcome. Steve Wills here. Thanks for joining me. We're particularly excited about this new version of Workflow Ascendant. And while it contains a number of enhancements, there are a few in particular that I'd like to draw your attention to. The first being that domino group names can now be used in constraints, so who can intervene when, as well as in email notifications. And most importantly, usernames do not need to be brought into the workflow document in the initial state. And this is particularly important as because here we're talking about who is authorized to create a document of a given type. And that could represent an enormous amount of usernames. So prohibitive to bring that into the workflow document. No impact to performance. I tried to implement this in the past, poorly, I'm afraid. And I'm pleased to report now that the performance is exceptional. So that was good news. And there's no impact to real-time delegation. Everything works just as before. So just to review a little bit, these next two slides, state documents, of course, being the very heart of Workflow Ascendant. So I'll create a document of type doc104, send it off into the workflow. Now we'll be looking at this particular state, the manager state. Orange, these fictitious users that we use to simulate company interactions. So these are the next states that are proposed to the manager. So in this case, he'll send the document back to the author for modification, A1. And as always, we always want to notify the person that their intervention is required in a particular document. And here, of course, is the intervention log, very important for auditing purposes. Now going in is the DB admin, black. We'll take a look at those definitions. These are the states that represent the process. And this is where those next states came from, as you can see. Here is where the log information was taken. And lastly, the email that was sent. As you can see, these are basic add formula statements that are directly interpreted. Trigger documents. These are likewise directly interpreted structured routines, though in this case relative to time as opposed to user actions. So we've sent one document off in the process, and then we will go into time trigger time simulation. We can simulate time with Workflow Ascendant. We'll advance 3 days into the process. And as you can see here, the days counter was incremented, as well as an icon displayed in the view to indicate that the document had surpassed the allocated time. An email was sent out to the user with a copy to the director. That would be bad. We're advancing 3 more days now, and worse. The document has now been redirected to the director. Oops, yes, I forgot to show you this. You can see that the intervention log was updated, of course, to indicate that the document was forced over to the director. And here the email. Now taking a look at the definitions, as you can see, you can have multiple time trigger documents per workflow document type. So here, if there's no change from manager to any other state within 3 days, then this notification was sent out and those actions were taken. As you can see, that's the icon that was displayed in the view. Likewise here, now we're talking about 5 days with a redirect to the director. Of course, notifications, as well as the actions. And here, of course, is where the icon is essentially erased. Profile documents, this is new. So these are basically process scope variables relative to usernames or domino directory group names. You'll see here that A1 does not have the authority to create a document of type doc201. However, we'll come in now as user D4. D4 will press the create button. As you can see, doc201 is available to be created by a user of that profile. So D4 will send it away. And we're in now as the DB admin. We'll take a look at the definitions. Going into the initial state, $created is always the initial state in a process. Only people in that group, in that profile, can create a document of this type, because here we're talking about the initial state, $created. So if we were to go into the corresponding profile documents, you can see here, very importantly, you can define domino directory groups. So going into the domino directory, as you can see here, the group name, and we have multiple levels of groups, groups within groups. So we'll follow the groups down the rabbit hole, if you will. And here we see D4, finally. So Workflow Ascendant handles recursively groups within groups. And very importantly here, just to show you that those emails were not brought into the document. The emails, no, the usernames, excuse me. And you can see here the option to create or not the names in the actual workflow document. All right, well, these functionalities already existed in the previous version, but we've enhanced them. Here is an example where they were not enhanced. It's basically the same thing. I put these into for consistency with the developer's guide that'll be coming out shortly. But those protected areas for user comments, we are doing that now differently. You can still use the old approach, but there's an easier way by default. And as you can see the names here associated with each one of these comment areas, those job titles are automatically provided from the profile documents. So it provides consistency in addition to just being easier to use. Oh, and for the email that was sent, you'll see here that a user, the directory group name was used. Again, an improvement over the past. You have the option to use those and insert those in those email definitions that you saw earlier. Now, this is essentially the same again, just to be consistent with the developer's guide that will be coming out. Now, as you can see here, we can automatically create the comments area per profile. And here is where we have an example of a domino group name being used. Notice the brackets. That's what indicates to Workflow Ascendant that it's a domino group name. And here's a little convenience here. We can actually, on leaving, the field there. Notice the text that's automatically provided. Just a little convenience, that information is pumped from the profile document. Subsequent user assignments. From time to time, usernames need to be allocated downstream in a process. And I'll use this also to demonstrate exposing backend routines for Power Business users. So you can use the very routines that the workflow motor uses. You can see here that the usernames were not brought in on the open, but rather on the send command. I've exposed that tab just to demonstrate that. That tab's normally hidden, of course. So I'm just going to put this workflow document into a different state just to show you the delegation capabilities, that it works just as before. So we've created a delegation from orange to red, a particularly bad idea to allocate someone else who is further on in the workflow, but just to show you how well it's handled here. We'll once again advance into the time frame of where the delegation takes place. And as you can see here, now both documents are under the authority of the Director Red. And let's say that Director Red does not intervene in those documents. We're going to advance once again. And as you can see, only the document that was delegated went back to orange, which is what we want. And of course, the typical messages that are sent out when there is a change. Notice here that the usernames are not uploaded at document creation. It'd be a check mark in the view if that were the case. And here is where director username is to actually be uploaded from the Domino directory. So going in to see test group, and here we see Director Red. Oh yes, and here where the code abstractions take place, you can see on the send command in the initial state. So going into the back end and the script libraries, always application specific. As you can see here, the two routines. We could have used just that second routine because it gets the group names as well, but anyway. And here, the connection between the code abstraction and the actual routine calls. So what have we looked at? Well, it is an all-in-one design template for Power Business users. We took a look at state and trigger documents, the new profile documents, enhanced functionalities, allocating users downstream in the process, and for next week, we'll be looking at these particular subjects: enhanced security, error handling, fundamental in any workflow paradigm, migrating from one version to another, as well as a recap of what Workflow Ascendant 8.5 is all about. Well, that's all for this particular video. Thank you for joining me here. I hope you'll join me again next week as we look into those particular subjects. Thanks again for watching.